Two more guests for you now on this incredible story. William Henry, author, investigative mythologist. He is also the co-host of Whitley Strieber's Dreamland radio program. William Henry is on a mission to reveal the lost codes and myths and symbols. He's been a regular guest here on Coast to Coast. Hello, William. How are you?
Wonderful, George. So great to hear your voice.
Likewise, looking forward to getting your reaction to the story today. And Glenn Kimball, of course, is a regular guest on Coast to Coast as well. He's an expert in ancient manuscripts. He has got a B.A. in journalism, M.A. in communications. He has been one heck of an instructor at the Southern Illinois University, ranked by student evaluators in the top 10 instructors at the university. Glenn Kimball, our guest. Of course, how many instructors did they have at the university, Glenn?
About 800.
Good. I thought you were going to say 10. I'm kidding. You are.
Well, yeah, that might even been better, George.
I know. You're one of the best. Good to have you with us, Glenn.
Good to be here.
Glenn, give me your take on this story, this so-called discovery.
Well, the claims of the body of Jesus being located in different tombs and the claims of Mary Magdalene being located in different tombs are prolific. We know that there's a serious case to be made, at least by Japanese people, that Jesus was married in Japan. There's a serious case by Sue Olson and an Islamic connection that Jesus and Mary Magdalene are buried in Kashmir, following that he survived the cross and went to Kashmir after his supposed crucifixion. There's claims of Jesus' tomb in Africa. There's claims of Jesus and Mary Magdalene in Western Europe. There's not enough bodies to go around. George, if you followed every single one of the legends, it would be you'd be going stir crazy
forever.
Forever, because one of the things that really peaked and crescendoed by the 10th century was the fact that if you could have an artifact or some claim to fame, that people would pilgrimage to your church and pay their tithes and offerings, and it was one of their revenue centers for them by that moment in history. But if you wanted to find out where the people really went and why it's impossible that Mary Magdalene could have possibly been buried with Jesus in Jerusalem, that's a story that's really rather well documented. And Mary Magdalene was not buried in Jerusalem. It's impossible.
All right, William Henry, your take.
Well, first of all, I highly commend James Cameron and his crew for putting together this amazing story, this wonderful educational opportunity for everybody, because it's bringing together so many diverse points of view and putting a very important question on the line. What exactly happened to the body of Jesus? And we're not going to find any bones anywhere. If anything, I would submit that what they might have found in those ossuaries would be toenails, hair, or fingernails. And the reason I say this is because, drawing upon the Tibetan tradition, there is a very deep body of knowledge surrounding this whole idea of the rainbow body, the body of light, the resurrection body. And when the human body accesses the nerve channels that run throughout it, it can transmute itself into a light being. You have the capability to do this, George. So do I. And what was demonstrated at this time 2,000 years ago was this incredible possibility that is wired into each and every one of our bodies. And that, to me, is something that is being overlooked in this whole conversation. I agree with Glenn. You can make a case for Rennes-le-Château, France. They talk about the tomb of God being located there. FDR, as I wrote in my book, The Atomic Christ, sought the sacred, most precious casket of Christ in Mongolia in 1934. We have letters about the expedition specifically referring to this casket. And what FDR sought is the same thing I think we all should be looking for as well, which is the esoteric aspect of this. He knew you were not going to find the bones of Jesus or Mary Magdalene. What you were going to find, though, is evidence of this transformation into a body of light, a vortex of energy into which these adepts could transform themselves upon dying.
That's what it's going to all come down to, whether we believe that this human named Jesus had the ability to resurrect.
Yeah, you're right, George. That is the whole question right there. Strangely, This event is never described in the Bible. It is the foundation of Christian faith, in fact, Western civilization, but we don't know what happened or how did it happen. It's a lost event. It belongs to the mystery tradition, but now I think we're starting to be able to come into a time in history where we can look back and say, hey, this is really an incredible event here. What are the details of their resurrection? Because the details are so incredible that we should do a whole show on it, really, because there is so much here, so much that we are learning, and it's a subject of immense fascination for many, many people.
Glenn Kimball, what's truly the rationale behind this documentary? I mean, I don't think it's money for the people involved. I mean, what message are they trying to get to everybody?
Well, first of all, the network that it's on, and I won't mention the network, but it's been mentioned on the air here this evening. In my travels to Egypt, for example, this a year and a half ago, when we went to take some photographs of the places where Jesus had gone as a child with the Holy Family while they were in exile in Egypt, you could not take your cameras into these locations. They were restricted by this very same network who had bought up all the rights to the story of Jesus in Egypt, period. And in addition, they bought up all the rights to the Gospel of Judas, and they bought up all the rights to the Talmud Emmanuel. They are systematically buying up what sells a great deal, and that is the story of Christ. It's a bestseller. It's capitalizing on Dan Brown. Dan Brown is my hero in my mind. I've never met him, but I'd love to meet him.
Why? Why is he the hero?
Because he said the thing that to people that was would have caused him to be put up to ridicule, and that was the fact that Jesus may have been married to Mary Magdalene, and wrote a story about it, and this was not fun. This ended up not being a panacea for Dan Brown. It ended up being a very, very difficult trial for him, even though he made $75 million off of it. It was a very difficult thing for him to do. But he's unlike the other people that are doing this particular venture who are cashing in on this Jesus story, which it's an old thing. It's an old thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a story back 2,000 years ago. The Roman Empire itself had found out how much money the patrons had come and left at the church in at the temple on the Temple Mount, and they literally came and destroyed the Temple Mount, took it down brick by brick, milled off all of the metal inside the temple, and took it to Rome and used it as the revenue to build the Colosseum. That was the money they used to build the Colosseum in Rome. And when they figured out that they could make that much money off dismantling the temple, there were other reasons to take various and sundry pieces of the story of Christ and make revenue off of it, and that's what's happened over the centuries. The artifacts, the tithes and offerings of the people. It has been both a glorious story and a sad story at the same time.
Well, I'm getting two sets of emails, primarily those who simply say that they do not believe that these stone boxes contain the remains of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and I don't know if their belief system will ever change, regardless of what may or may not be found. The other group just simply says, I'm tired of this religious stuff, and I don't want to hear it anymore. What's the significance, Glenn Kimball, of all of this anyway?
Well, I think the significance is that the original story of religion is a story of history all the way back 100,000 years ago. We take, for example, something that would be interesting for this particular audience. You take the story of the Anunnaki, which Zachariah Sitchin has so ably presented on the air. The part that he's left out was the fact that if you look at the Anunnaki, or at the Sumerian exhibit that toured the Royal British Museum and the Louvre in Paris, and you take the one statue that is the statue of representing an Anunnaki individual, or the Anunnaki himself, if you look at it very closely, it's a man nailed to a cross.
Mm-hmm.
And this individual was nailed to a cross and predicted that he would be resurrected. And so the story of crucifixion and resurrection is an extremely old, original tale that precedes certainly Christianity as we know it at the time of Christ. Certainly the earliest known records of the Jews. It comes out of the earliest records of the Sumerians. It comes out of the records of India. It comes out of the records of China. It comes out of the records that Hesiod put together for the Great Alexandria Library, and those records come out of the Atlantean traditions, the Lemurian traditions, and all the way back to the King Kronos, the first king of the first epic of mortality.
Glenn, in terms of archaeology, we know there's been an effort to try to find the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, regardless of what it may depict, and the push, of course, to find the tomb. Are archaeological digs in that region prevalent, happening all the time, or are they pretty scarce?
In Jerusalem, they're pretty scarce. It's hard to get a license to do it. In Egypt, they're almost non-existent unless you're a member of Zahi Hawas's team, which Zahi's a wonderful man and is fun to work with. But to get a license to do these kinds of things, even in Greece, it's extremely difficult to get a license to do any archaeological digs in Greece. Look, Vindel Jones, ask him how difficult it has been for him to do the digs in Qumran. It's been a constant 40-year battle for him. These things are difficult at best to do.
William Henry, are we going to just have to go on belief, do you think, and the quest will continue, but we may never find the true answer?
Well, I think so, and again, getting back to Cameron, he did a phenomenal job with his Exodus presentation last year with the same crew, and now he's taken on this subject here. I'd like to see him next take on this whole subject of bodily transformation. I remember, when Glenn's talking about the Anunnaki, they may or may not have come here in spaceships. I mean, you can make a very good argument that some of these beings demonstrated for us this bodily ascension like those mentioned in the Bible with Enoch, Mary, Elijah, and possibly Moses as being figures that affected this same transformation of their body into a light being. And that's the real question that we're talking about here, because who cares about an ossuary? Who cares about some of this other stuff? What we really want to get to are what are the ultimate esoteric knowledge that's contained in these events, and that is what has been withheld from us from virtually the very beginning of this story.
Glenn, who takes these bones out, regardless of whose bones they may be? What happens? Why are they pillaged?
The bones themselves are pillaged as artifacts. If you tour the cathedrals, both of Asia, but especially as you get into Central and Western Europe, we put these things on exhibit. They are traded back and forth between religions. I know that Mark, the bones of Mark, were traded between the Coptic Christian faith and the Christians themselves. These things are traded back and forth almost like baseball cards. I apologize to be irreverent about that, but that's the way they do them. And they do it because they cause a pilgrimage of people, an interest in the people to come and contribute to the welfare of a particular church. That's not always been the case. Temples were largely the site where you brought your tithes and offerings prior to the dismantling of the temple in 70 A.D. by the Roman Empire. That's where they did it, but they didn't know how to reconstruct a temple back in the original format. That's what the Knights Templar found when the nine French knights that were members of the Fraternal Order of John found and converted themselves into the first 9 Templars. They found the secret of the original temple and why it was originally built.
And what might have that casket been that the Templars possessed, Glenn?
The casket, what the Templars found, they fit on the back of a horse.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not a casket. A casket wouldn't have fit on the back of a horse. It was a group of manuscripts that they took from the Temple Mount, beneath the Temple Mount, and wrote it back. And basically what they did was by the time they got back to France and they began telling everybody what they had found, that they had found the original Temple Protocol, that every single person, rich and poor, were willing to contribute to this enormous building fund, which would have reconstructed the original temple and put it back in operation the way it originally was. And that would have conflicted with all of these churches who had artifacts and relics, which were the things that were motivating people to bring their revenues to the churches. If they'd have put a temple back in operation, it would have changed literally the cash flow entirely. That's part of the reason why the Templars were exterminated in 1307, was because they threatened the financial wherewithal of the powers that be at that particular moment in history.
Glenn Kimball, are you a believer in the resurrection theory?
Yes.
You are, indeed. Even though it's possible you think Jesus may have traveled around?
Yes.
Glenn, William?
Oh, absolutely, George. I mean, this is the fundamental idea of Christianity. It's the founding principle of the religion, but it's found in numerous traditions. George Osiris did the same thing. You find the same tradition in the Tibetan tradition, and what I'm attempting to do is go into these other traditions and pull some of these pieces together. It forms an extraordinary story, and again points to this idea that you and I can do this too. We just don't orient our lives that way.
What is it about this ability to resurrect, to be able to literally, raise your body from the dead? Was it magic, William, or was there really something here?
Well, it's really about shifting the body's vibration into a vortex of energy as much as anything. Again, the Tibetans have a very precise science about this. I'm working through an amazing book called The Dalai Lama's Secret Temple that lays this all out. This was the secret temple that the Dalai Lamas would go behind the Potala Palace, where on the walls of this temple was this whole story laid out of affecting the transformation into a body of light. We see the same thing in the Egyptian temples, and it's profound to think about it. And again, we don't see imagery like this. We see images of Jesus on the cross suffering for our sins, but we don't see as many images of the transfiguration when he took the disciples up to the mountain and turned into this body of light. We don't see enough imagery of the incredible gateway imagery when Jesus is standing in front of the gateway of concentric rings, similar to what we see on the Mary Magdalene casket here, and he enters the gateway into another realm. It's just our culture has to shift away from the suffering premise into this ascension premise that enables us to get a hold of this whole teaching.
Glenn, we took your recommendation and got Gunnar Thompson on last week, and it reminds me a little bit about this, that things happened so many years ago, thousands of years ago, that people just don't have the answers for.
Well, certainly they don't. And if you were to look for evidence like bringing it into a laboratory, there is evidence if you cross-reference text and you take a curvilinear mathematical approach. We hear the music coming on,
yes,
and
sir.
What a wonderful job you've done, George, bringing this all together.
We'll be back in a moment with Glenn Kimball and Mr. William Henry. And William, I want you to talk more about FDR and his quest for the casket of Christ. I'm George Norrie, back in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. William Henry, tell me about FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's quest to find the casket or the body coffin of Christ.
This is a story I started researching in 1998. I wrote a book called The Atomic Christ about this search. Essentially what happened is in 1933 and 1934, FDR and his two-term Secretary of Agriculture, Henry A. Wallace, who was deeply steeped in the occult and a disciple of Nicholas Roerich, a Russian mystic, they dispatched Roerich to Mongolia in search of this casket. He was sent there under the auspices that he was seeking drought-resistant grasses to solve the Dust Bowl problem. But it was widely known in the halls of the Roosevelt administration that Roerich was actually seeking the reincarnated Jesus and the secrets of the Grail. And in one of the letters written by Henry Wallace to Nicholas Roerich, which we've got posted on the Coast site, a letter written in March 1933, Wallace explicitly says, "I have been thinking of you, Nicholas Roerich, holding the casket, the sacred, most precious casket, and I have thought of the new country, which is America, going forth to meet the 7 stars under the sign of the 3 stars, and I have thought of the admonition, await the stone." What FDR, Wallace, and Rurik were doing was reenacting the archetypal drama of the three wise men, the three magi, in search of the Christ child and the secrets of the Grail. They were doing so because they believed that discovery of them would give us a one-up on the Nazis, who are also looking for this stuff, and would help inaugurate the new order of the ages, also known as the New Deal. In my research, I draw a direct connection between FDR's search for the casket, for Christ, for the Grail, and the appearance of the all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill, which was placed there at the request of Henry Wallace and Nicholas Rurik after this expedition took place, suggesting that they found something of immense significance, because it's believed by Masons that all-seeing eye on the back of the dollar bill refers to the return of the Christ or Messiah, the missing capstone.
You know, I don't know why I feel this way, William, but I just think that somewhere on this planet, some multi-billionaire somewhere might have the Ark of the Covenant, the Holy Grail, might have, you know, the stone box where maybe Christ was put in originally before resurrection. I don't know, but I just have this feeling that some wealthy person has everything, has all these secrets.
Well, if they do, let's hope they're putting the pieces together and they're going to demonstrate for us how these things are actually used, because there's always been this patina of mystery about these artifacts and these relics, but in fact many of them were devices that had very specific purposes. They were weapon systems, they were communications devices, they were designed to help us link with off-world entities. And this is kind of the whole missing piece here when we're dealing with this. But as we've talked before, George, it's also a fact that we can make an analogy to the Holy Grail, to the human heart. We can make an analogy of the Ark of the Covenant in the human body, in the lower three chakras. We can make an analogy to all of these relics inside the human body, because our body is in fact the temple that is always being described, and it's to the extent that we learn how to make this body work as a spiritual entity that we're going to be successful as humans.
Glenn, what would it take for people to believe that maybe the stone boxes were found or could be found? Will they ever believe that?
They never will believe it. Once they realize that we have documents like the letter that Jesus wrote, that's recorded by Eusebius. Eusebius was the Archbishop of Rome under Constantine, and Jesus wrote a letter back to one of the fragmented kings in India, saying, "I will not return, but I will send another in my place," indicating, first of all, that he had been there once before, and second of all, that somebody would go to India. And that person that went to India was Thomas, his little look-alike brother. Mm-hmm. And by the way, when Jesus died, his widow was placed in the care of whom? Under Jewish law, next of kin. So who had the caretaking responsibility of Mary Magdalene? Well, we know that Joseph of Arimathea took all the greatest personalities out of the biblical personalities out of Jerusalem for their protection on a boat with no oars or sails in 36 A.D., but they didn't get to Marseille, France until about 48 A.D. What happened between that period of time? Well, we have a very good clue of what happened, because the largest apocryphal book that survives in our century is called the Acts of Thomas. In that book, Thomas is sold as an indentured servant to a guy named the Merchant of Alban, who happens to be Joseph of Arimathea, because he didn't want to go to India. Jesus wanted him to go to India on the post-crucifixion mission. And in his company, he took with her a person called the Flute Girl, who by her own admission was a Hebrew, familiar with Thomas. And who was that girl? Nothing but Mary Magdalene. And her daughter, by the way, was none other than a little girl called Sarah Kali, or Tamara. Sarah Kali is her name from India. She is the antecedent for the Black Madonna in all of Western Europe. Sarah Kali is a name from India, and that little girl was the daughter of Jesus. And when Jesus, therefore, by 48 A.D., when Mary Magdalene finally got to Marseille under the protection of Maximus, her daughter was there, and Mary Magdalene and Sarah Kali become the patron saints of the Basque and of the French. And I mean, this is no small story. And, you know, the classes for this month, believe it or not, coincidentally, are on this humongous text called the Apocryphal Acts of Thomas at KimballCollege.com.
Glenn, some people have theorized that the powers of Christ were much more than spiritual, that they might have been extraterrestrial. I mean, do you think that's even conceivable?
Well, it most certainly is. And, I promised the last time I was on the air that we would do a show on who left the planet. And I'm putting that together for you.
Good.
But yes, for example, when I was was one of the first white people at Tiwanaku in the high plains of the Altiplano in Bolivia, the one thing that's amazing about this particular huge ancient site is the fact that these people grew crops at 13,000 feet high up in these mountains. You can't grow crops at 13,000 feet high. I mean, that's above the timberline, for heaven's sake. They had such a sophisticated irrigation system that it never froze. And who taught them this irrigation system?
Well, where?
The Titiwitacocha, or the white-bearded God, creator of all the world, taught them, or the pale prophet, taught them not only the science of their faith and religion, but taught them the science of agriculture.
Would you believe this theory as well, William, that there might be some kind of extraterrestrial intervention here?
Oh, without a doubt. And I've documented this in several of my books, most recently Starwalkers and the Dimension of the Blessed, where the Anunnaki brought the secrets of these gateways to Earth. They didn't necessarily travel in ships. When they're coming and going, they're doing so through doors or gates that lead to other realms, the Dimension of the Blessed. What is the primary message of Jesus? He is the door. What does he demonstrate for us? The ability to transform ourselves into vortexes of energy, light beings, so that we can enter these doors or gates that lead into the heavenly kingdoms. This is all an extraterrestrial sacred science. There's absolutely nothing religious about it. We've just made it religious. But in effect, what that has done is taken it away from the average person and assigned it only to a very rare, extremely rare class of beings. But what we have found is that there are those that have demonstrated this for us. As I mentioned, Enoch, Elijah, possibly Moses. And it's apparent that Mary Magdalene might have been one of these beings who affected this transformation too, George, because one of the things we haven't talked about on this casket, the alleged casket of Mary Magdalene, is that she was known as the Master. Well, this is a title that the Gnostics were very comfortable in assigning to Mary Magdalene. She was the illumined one. She was the awakened one. And when she arrived in France, she then took on the title of the Illuminator, the Illuminatrix. That was what she was called. And the reason she's called that is because she possesses this original sacred science that is of extraterrestrial origin.
Well, this is going to be on March 4th on the Discovery Channel, William. You going to watch it?
Oh, absolutely. I can't wait. I mean, again, what Cameron did in the Exodus show was phenomenal. I mean, absolutely gorgeous and well thought out, well put together. Whether you agree with it or not, it's must-see TV, because this is the dialogue that we need to be having right now.
And, Glenn, are you going to watch it?
No.
How come?
Well, I have issues, and not with the information, but with James Cameron himself.
So you want to leave it at that, huh?
I want to leave it at that because it's not here nor there. It's not for this program. But I have to agree with my good friend here with regard to Mary Magdalene, William Henry. And the fact that if you go to India today, you have enormous university systems that are still ancient ones that were named after Mary Magdalene. She was the enlightened one, and she took her information from India under the protection of Thomas, through Joseph of Arimathea, all the way into Marseille, France. And you're absolutely right, William. This is. You're right on the money here, and the people who came and went were often called the Watchers. Hesiod talks about the fact that there were 10,000 of them that came from the time of of King Kronos. These were the translated beings. These are the ones that were translated rather than being destroyed with the rest of their culture. And by the way, this is something that the Bible talks about. We could trace that one forever, but we're not. That's not the subject for this evening.
William, in this particular case, part of your career has been to find these ancient stargates and very strange mystical things that have appearing on this planet. Do you believe, regardless of your own personal beliefs, that we will ever find any more evidence about Jesus' true existence?
I think there's probably been a tremendous cleanup job. I mean, if FDR knew about it in the 30s, people certainly knew about it before him. And I just intuitively feel that a lot of this has been cleaned up. But then there's this other part of me that says, it's still open to discovery. I talk about this bizarre notion that, again, comes out of Tibet, that these sages, and Jesus is counted in their company, had an ability, George, to take knowledge out of their being and deposit it in crystal. They could deposit it in a stone statue, in a limestone statue. They could deposit it in a red granite statue, and that knowledge is preserved for eons, and it still awaits, according to this tradition, which is called the Terma tradition, certain individuals who are of the frequency of this knowledge to stumble upon it and retrieve that knowledge. So there's a game that's being played here. Earth is a chess game. And there are powers that want to see us ascend to the level of the gods. There are powers that want to keep us at the level of slaves and sex objects. And this kind of discussion that we're having plays into this whole chess match that is being played. We're either going to get checkmated by burying our heads in the sand and not paying attention to this, or we're going to start making the moves that are going to enable us to get to the other side. And I, for one, my Indian name, by the way, is Skipping Rock, because I'm the rock skipping across the pond. The object is to get to the other side without sinking. And that's the position we're all in right now. We're so close to being able to apprehend the secrets of the other side that this is when the powers that don't want us to have that knowledge will seek to checkmate us.
Glenn Kimball, overall, this entire perspective, the search continues, but do you believe a tomb will ever be found?
For Jesus?
Yes.
A vacant tomb.
Of course, how will we ever know that it was his?
I think that all things will be made now, and I think William Henry believes the same thing, too, that this universal stream of consciousness, when we return to it, we knew everything before we got here. We came and a veil of forgetfulness was placed over our minds upon our birth, but that veil will be lifted from us before the final judgment, at least that's the prophecy. And when that happens, we'll understand each other from an intimate point of view. And that's what really levels the playing field for the entire world, by the way, George, is the fact that we share everything in common. Everything that happens to me, you'll see through my eyes someday.
True.
And everything that happened to you, I will know from intimately well, because that's the way it was before we came here. It says in the Bible, it says that your sins will be shouted from the highest mountains. Well, that's a metaphor for having a universal consciousness and sharing understanding amongst each other. And yeah, we'll know. We jumped for joy when we came here. We'll jump for joy when we find out why we were here and remember what we had before we came. It'll be a happy message for us all.
Well, at least the discovery or the quest for the discovery is pretty darn exciting. Wouldn't you both agree?
I agree 100%.
You?
Absolutely.
That's what makes, I think, all of this so fascinating.
And I think your role, George, I don't want to be too patronizing, but your role in the discovery process was something you agreed to do before you came here. And what an enormous and great thing you have done. I have to compliment you. William Henry, you too.
Oh, thank you, Glenn. I second that emotion.
And, Glenn, like I was saying earlier, we have tried to find archaeologists who would agree that they found the tomb of Jesus in the stone boxes. But, other than the filmmaker and the producer of the Discovery program, we can't find anybody.
Well, and I'm afraid that's the way it's going to remain, because no one with any credibility would come on that particular side. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't some claims. I tell my people two things. There's two things that I struggle with every day. One is to find courage to say that which I know I must say, which is difficult to say in public and would bring me up to ridicule. But the second thing is to keep my mouth shut about the things that would be of interest to everybody, but are really practically useless, are of no meaning whatsoever. They're just for tabloid exploitation and all. Those two things I struggle with every single day of my life, to try and decide which issues belong where correctly. And this particular show is one of those particular times, George, and you and I both know that how much I've struggled over this one.
Yeah.
Because there are issues for me. And it's not an issue of something horrible or horrendous or bad or wicked or devilish or anything like that. It's the fact that there are things that we just don't say because they are tabloidish and are none of anybody's business. And I don't need to make money off the blood or the embarrassment of someone else. But there are issues of us being courageous and standing up and saying what we feel in public and would bring us up to public censure, even though we know it's important for the world. And certainly William Henry's done that, and I try to do it all the time. And Mike Kaiser and his companion appear to have done it their whole lives, and I have to view this panel as being a group of people who have people after my own kind.
Glenn Kimball's website, as I mentioned, is linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We've got a couple of them there, ancientmanuscripts.com, and then Kimball. I always spell his last name for you, Kimball. KimballCollege.com. William Henry, of course, his website is williamhenry.net. Make sure you put in the net there, williamhenry.net. And, William, every time you're on the program, you get thousands of hits on that website, don't you?
Yeah, I love it. It's really a true pleasure interacting with the Coast audience, whether through email or in person. And thank you again, George, for the opportunity to share some of these thoughts because, we can talk about Anna Nicole or we can talk about the casket of Mary Magdalene. And in this instance, I think we're making the wise choice tonight.
I think we did. We did. We'll come back. We're going to take some phone calls with our guests for their final half hour, Glenn Kimball and William Henry. So it's your turn. In the next hour, we've got open lines right here on Coast to Coast AM. I'm George Norrie. Well, yes, The Lady in White. That's where that one's from, that song. You've got to get it. It is a great, great ghost movie, one of the best I've seen in a long time. We'll be back. We'll take your phone calls next with Glenn Kimball, William Henry, in a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Glenn, as I was talking with our Mike Kaiser and Daryl Bach about this earlier, the fact that this was known 10, 11 years ago, why the gap? I mean, how come we didn't have any real push with the information in between?
Well, we did have, and they solved the issue, but it's been an issue. The reason why it's come out most recently has been because the people who control the media have done it for their own interest's sake.
I see what you mean. They're kind of hidden away for the right time. The old trump card, the ace.
The day you
under
can make
the
a
sleeve.
buck off of it is the day you announce it.
Interesting theory. William Henry, let's go for calls. And again, what we'll do is we'll get you both to answer whatever question one of our listeners may have. Let's go east of the Rockies. You're on the air with us. Thanks for calling.
Yes, sir. Hello, George.
Yes, sir. Hi.
This is John from Fort Payne, Alabama. I was wanting to know if they'd done any kind of DNA testing on the shroud compared to the bones or whatever was found in the box of Christ, and I'll take my answer off there.
Okay, there was never any DNA with the Shroud of Turin, and in this particular case, as Daryl Bach mentioned an hour or so ago, they are able to do some DNA work, but it's very, very slight. It is really degraded. Glenn, is that what you understand?
And they can't do the DNA. They've done the DNA that shows that the two of the individuals were not related, which says basically nothing. And what the only DNA that would have made any difference is if they had found a son that related the two individuals together, and that's not a DNA thing that they were able to do. They're trying now to do some DNA research in the tomb of the so-called tomb of Jesus in Kashmir right now. But what are you going to compare it to? If you have the DNA of Jesus, how are you going to verify it?
You know, what's amazing, and we've got it on the coasttocoastam.com website, the discovery over the weekend, that was the big story of these creatures in the sea. I mean, those things are amazing. We continue to find things on this planet that we never knew existed before.
Without doubt.
Let's go to our wild card line. You're up with us on Coast to Coast. It is your turn. Hi there.
Yes, my name is Connie.
Hi there. Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, hon. Hello.
Yes,
Are you going to go?
Rosemary?
Go ahead, dear.
Oh, yes. I wanted to find out. I wanted to ask your guest if he's heard of. There's someone called Bala Cristo Seshu from northern India.
I'm going to have to let you go. We're getting too much feedback from you. Let's go to our wild card line. You're on the air. Hi there.
Hi, this is Kish from Las Vegas.
Hi, Kish.
I was calling one of your guests, Mr. Kimball, was expanding on previous knowledge that we had, and then in birth there was a veil placed over it. And I was wondering if he believes in Mormon theology, because I've never heard.
If you'd like to make a call.
Uh-oh. Let's see. Who's Glenn? Are you there?
Hang up and then dial.
All right.
Oh, we lost Glenn?
Hold on. William, are you there?
Just put them both on hold.
All right. Well, they are on hold, Danny. So we got to see who we've lost. All right. Tommy, you're going to have to call them both back because they are gone. I wonder how that happened. Poof, off they went. Well, let me go back to the call. You're on Coast to Coast. Go ahead with your question, Kish.
I was fascinated by Mr. Kimball's when he was talking just a few minutes before you went to break. He was talking about this knowledge that we all had previously, and then a veil was placed over us at birth, and it was knowledge that we would have again. And a lot of Christian believers don't believe that, or mainline Christianity, but the Mormon Christian or Mormon faith teaches that inexplicably. And I was as soon as I heard him say that, I jumped onto your website to find out more about him. I'm trying to find out where he's bringing that philosophy from, if he agrees with Mormon theology, or if this is just something that he has garnered from his study of ancient documents.
I think it's a process of the both. Interviewing him, Kish, for so many years, the ancient manuscripts and work he's done, he's a believer in, but I think there is some Mormon belief there as well. And well, let's ask him, because we've got him on the line here. Glenn, I don't think you heard the entire call, but he wants to know if some of your beliefs are based on, of course, the ancient manuscripts and work you've done, but also Mormon belief.
Well, my beliefs are based on 500 different religious beliefs, and certainly not specifically Mormonism. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, that's what he's asking.
Mormons have a very open acceptance of new manuscripts because of the origin of the religion, and that's why people might associate us together. But that you must limit it to that association.
Okay, first-time caller line. Your turn. You're on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hello there. This is Harry. I'm calling from South Texas.
I hear you.
I'm suspicious of the timing of the release of this information. Again, as y'all say, it's been delayed some time, and with what's going on in the world, and this is circumstantial evidence that they're drawing conclusions on, I understand, and it seems like they're trying to disprove Christianity in doing this, and I sometimes wonder if there's not some behind-the-scenes drive with what's going on with the Muslim faith and the maniacs of that faith, and whether this is tied in with that, an attempt to discredit Christianity and shore up their religion.
Glenn, this is right down your alley.
Well, I really think that the amazing part of this is the network producing this particular television show, and we'll leave that unnamed, as well as the Gospel of Thomas, as well as the association here, are all, excuse me, not the Gospel of Thomas, but the Gospel of Judas, and the purchasing of the sites in Egypt by a particular network to exclude all photos and media contact with the early life of Christ. I don't know whether it's a conspiracy or just a humongous, gargantuan effort on the part of a megalithic, rich entity to usurp some of the funds of the story of Jesus. I rather think it's probably that rather than some clandestine effort.
Well, I don't know, Glenn. Every time I have a controversial subject, something happens to a phone. Whether it's Jordan Maxwell who gets clipped and he can't get his phone working for 2 or 3 days.
I got mine clipped.
To these very bizarre. I mean, it's bizarre. It's almost as if someone's listening in and they don't like what they hear and they go, and there it goes.
Yeah, I was sitting there. I didn't move a muscle tonight. My phone's been working, obviously, forever, and
boom, there you go.
The last 2 times I've gotten clipped, in fact, the only 2 times I ever got clipped was when I was a guest on your show.
Synchronicity, Glenn. Wildcard line, welcome to the program. Go ahead, please.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm from Philadelphia, and I just wanted to first comment that isn't this great that we can publicly have a forum about Christianity and talk about, if Christ resurrected or if he's still, and I believe the former, that he has been resurrected and he's beside the right hand of the Father right now. But if this was Muhammad, you guys would be afraid to be on this talk show. You would be afraid to even no. I'm not going to mention the station, but you wouldn't even mention it right now. And that's really sad, I think. We're all afraid. Look at how now it's not even talking about, National Organization of Women are not talking about, how these Muslim women are treated. And it's just,
I'd say it. If they if they thought they had found Muhammad's tomb, I would have talked about it.
I understand that, but we're all afraid. I mean, I think his name was Rushdie in the late 80s.
Yeah, the Iranian.
In 8th grade at the time, but I remember that. I can recall that. And we're afraid, and I think this is wonderful. I mean, I'm not, saying that, you're a bad person. I think that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and I believe that Christ would want you. I mean, he doesn't make puppets, and I'm glad that you have your own opinion, but I watch the news, I just shake my head. I mean, everybody is living in fear today, and it's wonderful that we could talk openly about it, and everyone attacks Christians. I think we're the whipping post today, and they would never do that. They would never do that to Muslims or Islamic or any other fascist group, I believe. I think we're sometimes lumped in with that, i.e. Rosie O'Donnell making comments on The View. I mean, you know what I'm talking about.
Hey, George.
I do. Go ahead.
I had a visit 2 years ago after a Coast to Coast show by 4 gentlemen in a brand new Cadillac.
A dark-colored Cadillac, no doubt.
Yes, it was, and they were wearing trench coats, and I live in Arizona. You just don't walk around wearing trench coats in Arizona. Okay? They stuck high-def cams in my window. I saw them. So I went out on my balcony in my brash form, and I said, if you gentlemen want to come in, come in. And one of them parted his coat, and he had some sort of a high-powered rifle on him. And I said, that doesn't matter. You're welcome in my home.
You let them in like that? I guess.
What am I supposed to do, George? He could have shot me right there.
All right, so you acted like you were.
What they did is they got in their car. They drove 100 feet down the pathway. Got out. All 4 of them got out. Looked back at me. I waved at them, and then I waved them back in, and they got back in their Cadillac and drove off. Now I don't know who those guys are.
What did the plates say? Did you notice that?
What's that?
What did the plates say on the car? Did you notice that? Like it was a government issue?
I recorded them, but they were a rental car.
It was a rental car. Do you have any idea who they were?
Well, they looked Middle Eastern to me.
You don't think governmental?
I don't know, George. All I know is that 4 guys in trench coats in the middle of the summer pulled up to my house, stuck high-def cameras in there, and they had rifles under their coat and would not come into my home.
What did we talk about before on the show that would possibly lead them to come visit you? Do you remember?
To be honest with you, I don't remember at this time, but it had something to do with fundraising. But, the amount of money is going into various and sundry funds, not us particularly.
I understand.
We don't do this.
It happens, George. I had a similar experience. First time I talked with Art Bell, I was a number of years ago. I was talking about an esoteric substance. It was an icy night in Tennessee. I had delayed a trip to Atlanta in the morning, and I put my all my research concerning the substance. I put my laptop computer in the car overnight during an ice storm. I put a gift for my girlfriend along with it. When I woke up the next morning, everything was gone. There were no tire tracks, nothing in the driveway to indicate anybody had been there. And I'm still to this day wondering, why did I pack up all of my research about this after being on the Art Bell show and put it in that car so somebody could come get it? And who came and got it?
You're not saying Art Bell took it, are you?
Oh, absolutely. No, heck no.
No, not at all. Not at all. West of the Rockies, you're on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hi there. I have a question here, and I heard a little bit about it earlier.
Sure.
How credible is this story? I saw a documentary on YouTube, and it's dealing with Jesus Christ and the resurrection. Okay, after the resurrection.
Well, the story's credible. The results may not be. But, I mean, they found something. The question is, what did they find?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I didn't know they had. You're right, exactly. So has anyone been able to get inside, the tomb itself there? Because this man goes to Kashmir, introduces himself as Yusuf. He's buried there, and on the top is a concrete slab with two footprints, and there's a mark on both of the feet, and they're in different places, but supposedly they took a computer simulation of that and put both of the one feet on top of the other foot, and it comes up that they would mark the match. And so he's supposed to be buried in Kashmir. I'll take my answer after.
This
Off of the air.
Be more apt for you, Glenn, on this. This sounds more historical.
Well, certainly Jesus isn't buried in Kashmir. He sent his little brother Thomas to India, which is the subject of the largest apocryphal book that survives in our century. If that were not the case, then that book would not have survived. And also there's a letter of Jesus saying that he would not return to India, and therefore there's a letter in his hand, and the largest apocryphal book in the world that survives both suggest that it was not Jesus' tomb. So, I'm much better at judging things based on manuscript evidence than I am on archaeological evidence. And according to the manuscript evidence, it's impossible.
Okay, let's go to our wild card line. You're up on Coast to Coast. Hi there.
Hello, George. This is Christopher Davis. Christopher in Pueblo, Colorado.
Thanks, Christopher.
I don't know if Glenn remembers me or not, but I'm the guy that sent him the list of herbs. But the thing I wanted to ask, especially to Glenn, but to your other guest as well, is another caller mentioned it earlier about there being a conspiracy or a possible conspiracy to try to turn people away from Christianity, and if the Gospel of Judas, most specifically, I wanted to ask him about in regards to that.
All right, who wants to jump in first?
I see a turning to Christianity emerging out of all this. I don't see a conspiracy to turn people off from it. I see it as an opportunity for people to really dive into it in a much deeper way. So many Christians, not to be accusatory here, have such a superficial understanding of the religion that they have banked their life on, that when we get an opportunity like this to look at this and to compare it with the information presented here with what we believe and find some historical data that supports this, hey, I'm all for an opportunity like this. Is there an agenda that Cameron possesses? I think so. I don't know what it is. Only he can tell us that. But I see this as an amazing opportunity for us to really learn something here.
I should have posed my question differently. What if the Gospel of Judas was authentic and this tomb is authentic? How much of a difference would that really make to Christianity? I mean, I personally, myself, it wouldn't shake my understanding of Christianity.
Well, it should a little bit, because the Gospel of Judas primarily indicates that the Savior is a divine spark, a divine particle that came from the Barbello, perhaps even another dimension, and that the body of Jesus was simply a useful tool, a clothing that was utilized by this divine spark. And by the way, you have a divine spark as well, Christopher, according to the Gnostic belief system. And the idea is that he demonstrated how to use this body, this technology, if you will, that is the human body, to operate it as a stairway to heaven, so that divine spark could return to the place that it came from. And in that instance, Judas did not betray Jesus. He is, in fact, a knowing accomplice and an initiate who assisted in what must have been an extraordinarily mystical performance, which is the transformation of Jesus' body into a vortex of light.
Glenn Kimball, will we ever get the answer? Will we ever know?
Well, the Gospel of Judas, first of all, is a real text, but those who have interpreted it wrong when Jesus took Judas out to look at the stars and said, "You'll inherit one of these." Remember in 1 Corinthians 15, when Paul's mentioning the three natures of the three heavens, one would be like the sun, one would be like the moon, and the other like the stars. It was a huge insult to Judas to tell him that he would be like the stars or inherit a kingdom like the stars. Though those who have translated the Gospel of Judas have suggested that Judas has some special place in the kingdom, I'm afraid that special place was not as honored as they thought it would be.
Well, I'm sure the argument will continue. Well, Glenn, thank you, and William, you as well. Appreciate you being on the program at this short notice.
Thank you, George, very much. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Good night.
And we'll be back in a moment because we will have for you an entire hour now of open lines, wide-ranging topics. So we'll be back with you in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. If you need to email me, it's always the simple, George@coasttocoastam.com.